20 years ago, I was the mayor of Peachtree City, Georgia. The city was one of the original master plan communities in the nation. Ours was centered around a village concept, strict land planning, and a one-of-a-kind multi-use path system that utilized golf carts for transportation. The city has achieved tremendous success and has been traditionally hailed as a thriving community with low crime rates, excellent schools, and superior recreational opportunities. Our city's positive metrics in Georgia were off the charts, boasting the highest median income, the highest median home price, the most educated population, and the top site for corporate locations. By the end of my final year in office, Peachtree City was ranked the 8th best place to live in the United States by CNN and Money Magazine. What amazed the reviewers from Money Magazine was the incredible quality of life we could generate on such a small budget. We are nowhere near the top of the list now. Those of us who have lived in Peachtree City for 15 years or more are concerned about the significant changes that have occurred. Schools have dropped in the rankings, crime is more prevalent, the city's budget has bloated, and taxes have increased sharply. To make matters worse, our current mayor and her predecessor have been on a quest to radically alter our award-winning land plan to a denser, more urbanized scale. Most believe such moves will only make things dramatically worse. I entered elected office immediately following the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Sales revenues fell, and I inherited a budget disaster. The previous administration had implemented an across-the-board pay increase, added employees and other expenses, and then rolled back the millage rate. It was a disaster. 4 years later, I left the office with the city's first AAA bond rating. Likewise, I entered office on the Fayette County Board of Commissioners following the disastrous Great Recession. Major adjustments had to be made, and by the end of my term, the county government received its first AAA bond rating. Joining me today is former City Council member Eric Imker, who is considered a budget hawk by both the current and previous mayors. Eric keeps an eye on what is happening in the city and is known for his key observations on local government finances. Neither of us is pleased with the direction in which Peachtree City is heading. Please join us for this discussion. And thank you, Eric, for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we're going to have a little budget discussion. Both you and I have been in the trenches on municipal budgets. We've actually pulled some budgets out of the fire in certain periods during the city's history. And it's time to have another good discussion on what's going on currently. But before we start that, one of the things we're trying to do at Editorial Interchange is we're trying to highlight locally owned businesses. And we want to highlight our local economies all over metropolitan Atlanta. And we ask our guests, if you have a locally owned business that you would like to give a shout out to, this is not a paid promotion. We get no money from these people, but one of our motivations for doing this program is trying to give all of our locally owned sole proprietor mom and pop businesses a leg up in our community. So is there one you'd like to give us?
Well, there's so many to choose from. I've got experience from my dealings with running the largest Monopoly tournament in the country here in Peachtree City. Many people don't realize that. But what I do is I've actually donated near $25,000 over the last several years in prizes.
Awesome.
But it's not actually cash for myself, even though I do donate a lot of cash. But I go around to these businesses and ask for gift certificates and things like that. Many of the restaurants do that. But there's one in particular that I'd like to tell you about, and that's a business called Fitness 54. It's on the east side of Peachtree City, just east of the Publix shopping center. And they've been very generous. Every time I go out and ask them for a gift certificate, they'll give me a 1 or 2 month membership that I can give away during the tournament. And their rates are extremely competitive to all the others. And so I actually joined them myself. So I wanted to give them a little shout out.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate that. And I think to Eric's point, always remember to patronize the local businesses that give money and make donations in your community. And it seems like he's found a really good one. So thank you, Eric. We appreciate it. Let's get into some budget discussions.
Great.
I thought it'd be a good idea to take something more recent, which is the retreat that the city had. They had the retreat out of town. They had it in Fayetteville. The year before, they had it in Suwannee in Gwinnett County. I'm not a big fan of them having retreats out of the city because it's an incentive to keep things away from the public, keep things away from the taxpayers, the constituents, and all of that. If you're going to discuss policy changes, major capital projects, all sorts of important issues with the city, you should do it where the public can see it.
Hey, Steve, how many people actually attended this receipt from the citizens?
Well, I can tell you this. On the first day, there were 2 people, me and someone else. And on the second day, it was me.
That's an opportunity for the citizens to see what the council is doing with what you just said, large capital projects, and they essentially shut everybody out.
Right. And I will give credit where credit's due. Council members Clint Holland and Suzanne Brown did demand that they have it in Fayette County because the rest of the members wanted to take it out of town again, out of county again. And they also demanded that it be recorded. So you can see the recording on the city's website if you go to meetings and agendas. The only problem is those things are all day programs. So you're looking at 6, 7, 8 hours of video. But we're going to hit a few of the highlights. I entitled it Avalanche of Expenses. And this is one of the things that came up with that retreat. They had several items that were infrastructure items that came from the most recent SPLOS. And it was astounding to me how these projects were so under budgeted. They had one project, it was a path project for $88,000. The actual cost is $1 million plus. They had another one that was budgeted in the SPLOS at $215,000. It's over $700,000. The third one was a little bridge project. It was budgeted at $300,000. It's going to be over $1.5 million. And the problem with that little bridge project is it's about 150 yards away from an existing bridge that the city just spent hundreds of thousands of dollars refurbishing and bringing back up to standards. So I was really shocked when I saw this. Now, they don't have to build these projects, but they said they were going to build them anyway, even though the actual costs are so much more higher than what they promised and told the constituents when they voted for the SPLOS. And I think one of the things that they can do, and I'd love to hear your view on this, Eric, is I think they could use that money in a much more efficient, better way if they plowed it into street paving, cart path paving, and essential projects that are already existing and absolutely need to be maintained.
I agree. There's a difference between gotta have and wanna have. And it sounds like they're going after a lot of wanna haves at the expense of the gotta haves. So it's a little disconcerting to see that happening.
One of the other ones was after they passed the FY 2024 budget, they all of a sudden announced that they had over $10 million in outstanding maintenance. Well, you would think that maintenance is somehow getting into the budget. Well, according to the retreat, they said they only have $750,000 set aside for the ongoing outstanding maintenance. But yet they're going to add all these new projects into the budget, and we're going to go over some of those projects. But they won't do the outstanding maintenance. And I don't know what it was like when you were in office, Eric, but I know when I was in office 20 some odd years ago, our theme was we're going to absolutely maintain all of our facilities to the best of our abilities. We're going to enhance those facilities. And only then, if we have money left over, are we going to consider any new projects.
Oh, I agree. I've got my own experience, having been elected for the first time in 2009 on council. My very first budget cycle, the next year, I asked the HR department to take out the salaries of all the employees, and what was left was the budget for each of the departments. And I insisted that we have a communication with the citizens, and we set aside a day for this. And I had each department head come into this meeting and explain how they're using their budget so that I understood how every dollar was being spent and making sure that it was being spent on something essential. and not just the gotta have, or excuse me, wanna have. And we did that with every department. And when we were done, I was convinced that the budget that was going to be developed for the next fiscal year had the essentials and not just the wanna haves.
One of the things about Peachtree City that you can't necessarily say about other jurisdictions, we always maintained a lot of budget discipline. We always had tight budgets. We always made sure that when we were estimating something, we were doing it properly, that when we looked at a project, that it was going to be something that was going to help the greatest number of people. And I think we're getting away from some of that discipline today. And I'll give you an example. It was mentioned in the retreat that they're keeping around 60% in reserves. And I'm like, why would you keep, 60% in reserves? Why wouldn't you give some of that back to the taxpayers in next year's budget as somewhat of an internal rollback? And they're struggling with that subject.
I think the reserves that are being suggested are way out of bounds. When I was on council, I worked with the city finance director a lot. I was in his office more than any other council member in history of this city. I wanted to make sure our budget was under control. And we examined what it took to have a AAA rating in our city. And I came back to council suggesting that we raise our reserves from, which was the weak point in our AAA rating, to at least 25%. And that successfully passed at the time. And now I believe the going standard is about 32% should be in our city reserves. And we're way over that right now. And I think that's unnecessary to be that way. And what we're doing is we're putting that burden on our citizens by continually taxing them so much to keep that reserve high when we don't need to.
Well, one of the things that the mayor was talking about during the retreat, and these videos, like I said, are available, so any citizen can go and watch these retreat videos. She was referring to the reserve fund as a rainy day fund. That's her phrase for the reserves, is a rainy day fund. And she cited that the city of Noonan keeps over 100% in reserves. And I'm like, that's lunacy. Why would you do that? Why is that your model? And like you said, to keep a AAA bond rating, you need to maintain about 32%. So they should, instead of rebating those excess funds in lieu of paying taxes, additional taxes in the following year, which was what they should do, they're actually talking about spending the money down. And so many times, and they did this just recently, they bought a building, and the building, they used the reserve funds, excess reserve funds for the building. Well, it wasn't budgeted.
No, that's not.
There was no real discussion on it. And so it comes out of nowhere because there was a building acquisition. So it comes out of executive session, and all of a sudden we're buying a building and we're using the reserve funds for it. That's not what those funds are for.
That seems totally out of bounds. The city's been in existence for 66 years, and we've never, ever used more than 5 or 10% of the reserves for an emergency. Say a large windstorm, a hurricane came through and we had a lot of damage that we needed to clean up. We're not going to have a situation where half our city is destroyed, where we need a $60 to $100 million reserve in the bank. Having a reserve of 30 to 32% seems to be the going standard, which is probably appropriate for a city like ours.
And just to let the viewers know, if you do have an emergency, and Kim did cite this, what if a tornado comes through? Well, you do use some of your reserves to handle the cleanup of that tornado. But GEMA, the Georgia Emergency Management Authority, and FEMA, which is the same thing on the federal level, they come back and they refund you all the monies that you've spent. So it's not like you have to keep an enormous amount of money on hand, because you're going to get the money back. So, the GEMA process and the FEMA process is very, very quick. I've done that. I did it with Fayette County when I was on the Board of Commissioners. We had the last big ice storm that we had, and we were getting money probably about 4 to 5 months after we had spent it. So it's not like there's this enormous wait or you're never going to get that money back. And expending some of those funds, if you do have a 1 in a million emergency type of thing, it's not worth storing 60 to 100% of your
What
funds in
what you
reserve.
just shared, Steve, is probably something very, very few of our citizens actually realize. And they're always not aware that the rebate or the refund is coming after the fact. So let's consider our reserves in the future to be something that just be discussed and budgeted into future budgets.
Let's talk about the FY 2025 budget. Um, a lot of people were very suspicious when all of a sudden they were seeing projects in the budget. One of those people who were suspicious was an actual council member Suzanne Brown, and they found over $2 million worth of projects that had never been discussed in a council meeting, never been voted on or approved, but all they were slipped in on various line items. And for example, one of them was a $450,000 allotment for a new splash pad. Well, the issue is we already have a splash pad and we just spent hundreds of thousands of dollars refurbishing that splash pad. But now one of the council members wanted a new one and the mayor slipped it in to the budget without any approved plans, approved budgets, or even discussion at a city council meeting.
Well, the whole budget process needs to be relooked at. The previous city manager, Mr. Bob Curnow, had a meeting several years ago, and I asked him point blank, how are you developing the budget? And he didn't give me an answer, which I found extremely disturbing. And the way I understand it now is what I've heard is that the mayor asks the city manager to give the council a budget from his point of view. Well, if I'm city manager, I'm asking each of the council members, what are your priorities and what do you think should go into the budget before I just generate my own budget? We've been doing this for 60 plus years now. We know what's generally going to be in the budget. It's that last 5 to 10% that's going to be the problem area that needs to be discussed and compromised on. And that's where you get into the meeting with the council members, and you do that in front of the public. You don't go behind the scenes and work these little side deals out and then slip them in without anybody knowing it. That's absolutely the wrong way to do things.
Well, and I do know that you and I are of like minds when it comes to budgeting. And if I'm not mistaken, you did the same thing that I did when I was in office. When you go and it's time to review the budget and look at the next year's budget, get in front of the department directors, various other city staff, maybe some state officials when you're looking at GDOT projects and how they may affect your city or whatever, getting in front of those people publicly and having them defend their budgets and explain if they need new allotments of cash for whatever line item, then they need to justify that in front of you as a council member, and not just have the city manager walk up to you at the end of the day and say, well, I've looked at all this, it's all great, and there's no need to do anything else, which is what they did for the 2025 budget.
Well, I'd like to point out that I first got elected to city council in 2009, and the next budget cycle, that spring, I told the HR director, I want you to take out all the salaries and benefits of employees. And once that was done, we had a budget of essentially contracts and hardware that the city needed. And then I asked each of the department heads as a council member, I said, I want you to prepare a briefing, and here's the format. So you're all doing the same thing so that we can share it with the citizens. And we scheduled a meeting for the citizens, essentially, to listen to each department head justify their budget in front of the public. And the council was there, and I was asking questions about each line item. I had a list every line item in their budget outside of the employee salaries and things, and they justified it. And we found out that when we were done, I was satisfied that 100% of the money being spent was for things that we had to have, not just wanted to have. And I had them take out things like each department had its own management reserve. And I said, no, if you need additional money during the fiscal year, you come to council and you ask for it. But we're not going to bury that in the budget in the beginning. Right. So we were able to come up with a streamlined budget. By the way, I wanted to point out, at the time I got elected to council, our city was over $20 million in the hole. And at the time, we had a $20 million budget. And I'm shaking my head asking, how the heck did we get in this situation?
Right.
Well, the contributing factor was the recession, the housing market concern at the time. But I said, all right, we're going to get ourselves out of this issue. And by the time I left council, we had a balanced budget, not using city reserves, and no future tax increases on the horizon. And I said, okay, I'm done with what I needed to do. So I voluntarily stepped aside from running again. I did what I wanted to do. And I said, okay, time for someone else to have the honor and privilege of being a council member. So I stepped aside.
You know, one of the things I recognized that when I was in the budgeting process for the city, you have to get down into the weeds sometimes and figure out what they're doing so that you can create your fiscal policy for the next year and the years following. And I remember one time vividly, we were maybe 3 months, 4 months into the fiscal year, and the fire department had spent all their money for bringing in auxiliary fire people from other departments to fill in for vacation spots, sick leave, and stuff like this. It's a common practice where for bringing people in. And one of the things I brought up was, how could we exhaust that thing this fast? So we went in and we went through the weeds and we looked at the policies. We looked at how they were doing it. We changed the way we operated. Several things that have been like that. And I noticed one thing with recreation fields. You know, the fields were in horrible shape when I first got in office. And one of the things was, I said, why are we getting more money out of the people who are using the facilities? And so I had a meeting. I brought all of the Recreation Association presidents in to talk to me. And I said, what can we do so that you can better help us with the field conditions? And they said, well, we'd love to put these advertising banners up on the outsides of the fences and the outfields of the baseball fields and all this kind of stuff like this. I said, well, why aren't you doing it? And he said, your ordinance doesn't allow us to do it. Well, we were getting thousands of extra dollars for field maintenance, you know, tens of thousands of dollars by letting them do this. And then we started charging an additional fee, which we weren't doing at the time. So if you were coming in from Coweta County, we had a lot of people at the time from Sharpsburg and Sonoy and stuff like that who were playing in our athletic associations. We charged them an extra fee. There was a surcharge. We had to figure that out. They gave us all that information. And sometimes you really have to get down in the weeds. And that's why I like having the directors come in there and defend each one of their budgets and explain it. Because if you are, as a council member, have to go to the city manager who then understands what's going on in that department, you know, you're playing that chain game where you lose something, and that director may have a point that they need to make that comes out a lot better than what the city manager could make, and it may cause a change in policy.
Yeah, I agree. You need to hear it from the people who are doing the jobs at the director level and below. Police, how many cars do you need? Fire department, how much equipment do you need at each station? Public Works, how many additional vehicles do you need for maintaining the city's streets, roads, and parks and things? You're not going to get that from just the city manager alone. You need the department heads to come in and tell you. And I always want that done in front of the public.
Right. Well, and you know, unfortunately, with this past budget, the FY 2025 budget, both the mayor and a couple of the council members said, this is what the city manager told us to do. The city manager is in charge of doing the budget, and we need to do what the city manager tells us to do. And I was just horrified by that.
Yeah.
You just should never take anybody's word for whatever they need. And you need to justify it. But let me bring up a point. During that process for the 2025 budget, Councilmember Suzanne Brown actually tried to do what we've been discussing and wanted to pull up additional budget data and make some comparisons between past budgets and the proposed budget, and try to come up with a good idea of what she wanted to see and give that to the staff. Well, unfortunately, she was refused all that. And we've got a video of her in one of the budget meetings where she brings that up.
Early on in the budget process, I requested a fair amount of data, and I was told that I had to have a consensus of council members to agree to get the data that I was asking for. I find that kind of odd, because if we're the approving authority, you would think that the data would be readily available to us. That just hasn't worked out that way. As I said last month, I want the millage rate rolled back. There are items in the budget that I want removed. We had a council and executive staff retreat in January and identified items that we wanted to see in Peachtree City. Wanting to see them and demanding that we see them are kind of two different things. I've equated that, making that list, to writing out a Christmas list as soon as I used to get the Sears catalog when I was a child. All of the items on that list are now in the budget. The problem is that there was no preliminary presentation of those items or projects with the projected cost for the council to vote on or look at or consider or learn about prior to them showing up in the budget. We didn't get that information any bit faster than you did.
That is just heartbreaking, Eric. I mean, that is to see a council member say, all these projects were inserted. I never knew what the cost was. I never knew. There was never a plan. Nothing was ever given to us. And now they appear in the budget. And now we're telling you, we can't give you any of the budget information. Sorry, just vote on.
That's just plain wrong. I don't understand how that can happen here in Peachtree City.
Well, I wrote several columns in the local paper on this budget process. It was one of the nastiest I have ever seen. And I will tell you, I did do an open records request on all the emails from the city manager and the city council members related to the budget. I was horrified by what I found in there. And anybody who's watching this program who wants to see those emails, I've already done the open records request. I've already paid for the open records request. All you have to do is call the city clerk's office and they can email those files to you. It's already done. This was the email response that the city manager gave to council member Suzanne Brown when she asked for relevant budget information so that she could make an informed decision. He says, Councilwoman Brown, I could put together alternatives for the city council to consider, but it would take my time to do this. I am adding all of the council on here as I feel this is a significant request that would need to come from city council itself as a mandate. Unbelievable.
I would not put up with that kind of reply. That city manager's on real thin layer right now.
I would consider that direct insubordination for his boss to ask for relevant budget information and say, I just don't have time to do it. And if you can get a majority to agree with you, which they didn't, they wanted to pass this budget with the $2 million worth of fluff in it.
It sounds like the city manager needs to understand how to delegate. He's kind of thinking, well, he has to do all this work. No, if you're doing your job right, you know how to delegate. And that's why you have department heads. I'm shaking my head right now thinking, what's going on there? The city councilwoman Brown is absolutely right. She asked for data. She should get it. No questions asked. I don't care how much time it would take somebody to do. That's her job, and it's the job of the city employees to get her that data.
Right. And when I'm talking about budgeting discipline and accuracy on your projections and being thorough with your presentations, they just recently, the city council gave across the board pay raises. They gave hiring bonuses. They gave cost of living increases on top of the restructured salary strata that they had created. The public safety employees got significant bonuses and a benefit package upgrade. Now, here's the problem I have and I'm not saying the public safety people didn't need a pay increase, but when you're discussing that has an impact on the law enforcement pension fund or the public safety pension fund, because fire is also in this. There was no mention of the impact on the pension fund and what that would cost us in years in the future. There was no projections on what it would cost us with just the change in the salary strata in future years. It was just, this is what we need to do and let's do it. And they did this phony comparison. Well, here's what this city does and here's what that city does. And that's why we should be doing it. No, that is poor research and poor reasoning.
I kind of agree. You've got these departments who are always asking for more. And salary increases are one of those things every year. There's a big battle over. We have these standards which the increases are based upon. And several years ago, I agreed that the personnel in police and fire needed higher salaries to be competitive with other cities. But across the board, everybody getting 9-10% raises did not seem justified. We needed to keep those people who are doing the emergency services like police and fire and even public works, make sure they're fully staffed and going to be with us for a while. We need the experienced people to stay with us. And you do that by making sure they're properly compensated. But a lot of the employees there are tagging along with these huge increases. Not that they don't deserve it, but we have to be careful about how we set up these raises because it has an impact in the future. Every year you're accumulating additional costs on top of what the current year is. And then, like you say, you're affecting the future retirement plans that can get out of control. So you have to understand, and the finance director needs to be sharing this information at the time budgets are developed so that the council understands what they're doing and the impact of the raises that they're going to be implementing.
I don't know how you as a council member can make a valid decision on such a process with the pay raises and the benefits increases and the bonuses and all of that stuff if nobody gives you what it's going to cost you in future years, especially with the pension plan. That's millions and millions of dollars in future years. And if the market goes up and down with that pension plan, you may have to throw in even more money to make it work. So, I mean, it just blows me away. But the worst part about this whole issue with kind of the lack of discipline with these pay raises and everything was the mayor told USB television, the news station, that we're going to raise all the salaries for the public safety employees and it won't cost the taxpayers a dime. That's what they told the news USB. I almost fell out of my chair when somebody sent me that news report and they said, we're going to increase everything across the board, millions and millions of dollars worth of changes, and it won't cost the taxpayers a dime, as if money is falling out of the trees.
Well, there's some kind of magic bag of money that the mayor was aware of that the rest of us weren't.
You know, I have to wonder, does she really understand how these things work?
Well,
Or is she just hoping that we're gullible enough to believe it won't cost the taxpayers a dime? I don't know which one it is.
what you're describing to me right now sounds very familiar to something we heard many years ago from the U.S. House of Representatives Speaker, Miss Nancy Pelosi. She says, well, you need to pass this budget to find out what's in it.
Yeah.
I'm saying to myself, you've got to be kidding. The people are not that gullible. They understand what's going on here, and they don't want to be strapped with some kind of future bills that they weren't going to be aware of. Just because the current council wanted to be friends with all the city employees. We got to do business as a business. You got to stand your ground when you're dealing with these type of budgets so that you can stay solvent in the future.
You know, one of the issues that I don't think a lot of residents understand either is when the city starts rezoning industrial land for corporate headquarters and, you know, light manufacturing, all these high paying jobs, and they rezone that property to residential and the impact that has on your community because you're taking a revenue positive zoning and changing it into a negative revenue situation with the residential. That just floors me. I think McDuff Parkway is the perfect example of that. All the development up McDuff Parkway.
I've got personal experience with exactly what you're describing. I don't want to rehash the history too much, but just let me emphasize a piece of land in the Wilkesmore section, which was north of 54, McDuff Parkway. On the east side of McDuff Parkway, you have the railroad track, and that was all set to be industrial. Right. And the plan was they would build a service road to connect to North Kedron Drive over the bridge there that they built. And that industrial park would be separated from the residential on the west side of McDuff Parkway. That was perfect area for a new industrial park. which was what it was originally designed for. And council voted against my negative vote to rezone all that to residential. And I'm saying, why would you do that? You're putting these homes up against the railroad track. We don't want to hear complaints from future residents 5-10 years in the future that there's too much noise from the railroad being there, when it was a perfect location for another small industrial park. And I don't understand what the motivation was for making that all residential when it was perfectly set aside for industrial and commercial. It just didn't make sense. And that's why I voted against doing that rezoning. But they went ahead and did it, despite knowing that the revenue income was not going to be equivalent to what was anticipated if it was remaining commercial or industrial.
Absolutely.
It just didn't make sense to me.
The consumption of services from the residential uses is enormous. Those corporate headquarters, they may call EMS once in a while. They may call Public Works if something's going on the side of the highway or something like that, but they're very low consumers of city services. The residential units, on the other hand, that you're putting them in with, if that house is not valued at $650,000, you're not even breaking even in terms of the city services that family
The
consumes.
line is, let's just raise taxes to pay for it. No, that's not the right solution, but we're experiencing some of that right now with future thoughts of annexations. And I know that on the south side, some of the council are thinking about annexing down there and turning it more into more residential. And we've already starting to experience the cost impact of that by having to build another fire station.
You know, that's one of the prime examples for citizens who really need to understand this. It seems harmless when the city just annexes those residential areas and converts land that they annex to residential. Down on the South 74 is a perfect example. They annex this, they bring in existing residential, and then they rezone for residential. All right, what does that do now? Well, that facilitates the need that you have to provide them with fire and EMS service and police coverage. Well, where's the nearest fire station? Way up the road. So now those innocent looking annexations and rezonings to residential are now costing us millions and millions and millions of dollars, several $1 million for a fire station, multi-million dollars worth of equipment that rotates every year in perpetuity, 24/7 staffing of crews, which costs us millions and millions of dollars, all because they wanted to bring in a couple of residential subdivisions into Peachtree City on the south side. And the rest of us are having to pay for that.
You're absolutely right, Steve. Some of the justification might be, oh, well, we're going to get impact fees from the developers. Well, those impact fees might be fine for paying a small percentage of the future requirements for another fire station or another police subdivision out there. But it does not cover the cost, like you just said, in perpetuity.
Perpetuity.
You have to maintain these services. You have to pay the employees forever. And you have to redo the equipment every so often. And none of that is going to be paid for by impact fees. That just covers the initial partial of some of the startup costs of these additional services. But what you're doing is you're setting up for future tax increases. And you have to think about that before you do all these annexations.
And the fire and EMS part is the obvious one because you have to build a station down there, right? With all that cost. But you also have to hire additional police officers. You've got to extend your public works crews because they're only working within the city limits. Now you've expanded their workload into another area. All the recreation's got to provide for more children and adults to be in recreation programs. It has a massive impact that a lot of people don't pay attention to. I mean, I was told the going rate for training a firefighter EMT is like $80,000 just to train the person. That doesn't even include their salary, their benefits, their pension plan, all this other enormous expense that we're going to be covering.
Yeah, I agree. It has to be carefully looked at before you annex something in. Are you going to annex it as residential or commercial or industrial? And the preferred method is commercial and industrial, but make sure you provide appropriate services required to support it. So, impact fees are one thing, but maintaining the cost of operations and maintenance is something else that you need to be considered.
And let's tell people an impact fee, just for people who don't know. When you build a building in a jurisdiction, the state allows you to collect an impact fee. So I'm making up a number. Let's just say I'm building a 5-bedroom, 3-bath house, and they allow me to collect $1,500 impact fee on that house. Now that sounds like a lot of money, and that sounds like a really good deal. But the problem is you have to build certain types of infrastructure with it. And if you build, let's just say we build a skating rink in one of the areas using the impact fees. Well, building the facility is the easiest part. It's maintaining and staffing the facility that's going to kill you in future budget years. So you can take all those impact fees, build some really nice facilities, and then all of a sudden you're left gasping for air as you try to figure out how you're going to fund the maintenance and the staffing.
I'm right with you. I've got experience when I used to work with the finance director, Mr. Salvador. When we were talking one time with a fiscal year's budget, and I said, well, we're going to need to replace a fire engine or two in the future. Show me in the out year budget where that new fire engine is going to be. And he flips through his pages and he shows me, okay, 3 years later, we're anticipating buying $1 million new fire engine. I said, great. How about an ambulance? And you got to flip through the pages and find another location in time where you're anticipating buying that new vehicle. And so when you set up a new fire station, you're not just setting it up at the beginning, you're setting it up for 10, 20 years from now and the replacement costs of the equipment that go in that station. And this is all on top of the other equipment that goes in that station, let alone the personnel that need to be paid to operate it. So it's a massive undertaking to just add one fire station to the city budget. Like you just said, we're talking millions and millions of dollars. And where's that money going to come from after the impact fees are initially used up to build the original station? So it's something that needs to be looked at very carefully.
And, I think that's one problem that the current council is having too. I don't see any serious efforts at looking at outgoing capital projects, having a project improvement plan in future years. And I think what they do is they depend a lot on the SPLOST. They throw a lot of projects in the SPLOST. The constituents say, sure, why not? It's a penny, it's extra sales tax, go ahead, do it. You build all these projects and now you've got to fund these things and staff them. And I think that's what really drives that point home on the impact fees and the SPLOST, use of SPLOST funds and things of that nature. People don't realize there is a very expensive catch to that in future years.
Steve, can I diverge a second here and give you a real 1-minute story about my experience with SPLOST? In the development of the current SPLOST we have, I was asked by the mayor right now, this was several years ago, to be on the committee to help develop SPLOST project ideas. And so I got on his committee, and just as an example, I've substitute taught, I'm diverging slightly here. I substitute taught over 600 classes in the local schools here in Fayette County. I'm a substitute teacher on my part-time. And I've taught at every high school in the county, every middle school in the county, and almost every elementary school in the county. When I get to these high school students and we execute the lesson plan that the teacher leaves for me, and we have extra time, I like to do something which is called a synergy exercise. And some of you may be familiar with it. It's where you're placed on a deserted island or you're on the moon and you have a limited list of supplies that you have, and you have to prioritize them to be successful. Well, I ask these students to do this, and I'm looking for 4 things when we do this exercise. The first is, all right, everybody generally starts and says, all right, what's the highest priority item to do? And they start working down the list. The second thing I look for is, when do they reverse that? When do they look for the least prioritized item and start building from the other end? And then I tell them the third thing. We put them into teams. First they do it individually, and then we put them into small groups, and they come up with a solution. And I always point out that the team effort is always better than the individual solutions. And then I tell them the fourth and most important point. I ask them, what's the most important question that you should ask in your group? And they think about it for a while, and very few people come up with the right answer. The right answer is, has anybody done this before? And that's exactly what happened with the development of this last SPLOST. I was on the committee and I tried to share with them that I had done this before. And I know how to word SPLOST items, the tier 1 and tier 2 items, so that you have the ability to do more than just what you want to narrowly point out as something you want to do. If you want to build a new cart path, you don't specify exactly where it's going to be, how long it's going to be. You say you just want to build new cart paths. And for some reason, they didn't want to listen to it. And they came up with this SPLOST list. And that SPLOST list is generally good. I like the approach where they added a lot of the right items, but with a little bit more emphasis on somebody who's done it before, using the legalese that needs to go into these items, we could have had a slightly better SPLOST.
Right.
And one thing I'd like to also add is relating the SPLOST to our city budget. I'm really, really concerned that we're relying so much on SPLOST that we're taking money out of public works to put that we normally put into road and cart path maintenance, and we're allowing SPLOST to do it. Well, when SPLOST goes away and it runs out and it's not renewed, you're now in multi-million dollar problem with the city budget because you have not been maintaining the budget within your normal process. You've allowed it to be slid over to the SPLOST budget, and you can't allow that to happen. You have to maintain your budget normally with the city, and the SPLOST should be more for those extra items that need extra maintenance.
The problem we have, Eric, is even with continual SPLOST dollars flowing in, we still have $10 million in outstanding maintenance that they can't afford to do, which they only had.
How that situation could arise. I mean, we've had 2 SPLOSTs now in a row. By the way, I used to do open records requests every month. In fact, now I do it every quarter. And the first SPLOST, which was several years ago, was I think a 5-year SPLOST, and they set up we were going to earn about $40 or $50 million. Well, my open records was showing that we were going to be averaging $60 to $70 million, way more anticipated revenue than anticipated. And I said, okay, next SPLOST, let's account for that. And so they did. So this current SPLOST, they have a target value of expected revenue. And I've been doing open records requests even today. And right now we're averaging well over $1 million more per year on this new SPLOST. And what are we doing with it? We're using it to pay for cost overruns on these tier 1 projects that are in SPLOST. And it's just, you set up these SPLOST projects, but fail to include all this maintenance that you're now talking about when you're putting all this money in and you're doing all these extracurricular things for things like recreation. And yeah, there's some really good things in SPLOST, but you're not doing it properly if you have $10 million of facility needs of maintenance that's been left undone.
Talking about financial issues that we have that we really need to pay attention to, we've got a couple in Peachtree City. The first one, the stormwater utility that we pay into several times a year that a lot of people complain about having to pay, it's going to be $39,000 in the red this year. So expect those fees to rise significantly. In the 2025 budget, the city spent $1.3 million on new employees, and the city has raised nearly every fee the government issues for the last several years. This is a continuous thing, and they're talking about we want to make our city friendly to businesses. Well, we keep raising their fees. We want people to keep their homes up and renovate and take good care of it. We keep raising the fees for that. So it's kind of counterproductive. Now, the city manager has also mentioned that he's looking at trying to do a new $7.5 million revenue bond. That's in addition to the taxes, the fee increases, and the SPLOST money. And then there's the discussion of the city spending possibly tens of millions of dollars to start its own 911 call center when the county is doing that service for us for free. Well, not for free, but already it's already built into our tax system. So we would be paying for that in addition. And let me tell you, 911 call centers are something if you don't have to do one, you don't want to do one. The employee turnover in call centers is horrendous. Now, we talked about designating the land for corporate headquarters into residential and the annexation's what it means. But what are your thoughts, Eric? Give me some thoughts on what we posted.
I'm looking at the two big bullets that you just listed. I think they were the third and fourth bullet. The $7.5 million revenue bond or facilities bond consideration, and the 911 cost center for $10 million or more. First of all, let me address the 911 center. If you look at your tax bill in November, you already see a line item for emergency services. So we're already paying the county to do that for us. So let's look at, why would we need something separate for Peachtree City? And maybe they just need to expand the county's level of service a little more instead of us coming up with it on our own. $7.5 million revenue bond for facilities. On City Council, we initiated what's called a facilities authority. This was done in the 2010-11 timeframe, because at the time, I mentioned several minutes ago that we were $20 million in the hole and we had a $20 million budget, and we didn't have money to replace roofs on so many of our city facilities. We didn't have money to maintain the parks and recreation. We didn't have money to do pretty much anything. So we created a facilities authority, and we generated or created a small revenue with a facilities bond that was added to the tax bill every year. But with the situation we have now and the SPLOST that we have now, we need to examine what has to be done right now. Is it gotta have? Is something about ready to fall apart, or can we wait for the next SPLOST type of item where we can include it as a tier 1 project and get it that way, so we don't have to incur an additional tax increase in our bills every November? Let's be careful about how we implement a new facilities bond to pay for something we may want to have versus may gotta have. I would like to look into that real carefully before we commit to something like that.
And just to let viewers who may be new to Peachtree City, who weren't here when you were on the city council, in your prior professional life, you handled some enormous budgets and reigned over those things and raked over them. Can you give us a little bit of background there, just so people know that you're speaking from a level of expertise and experience?
Well, thank you. I'm happy to do that. I'm a retired Air Force, and as part of I spent most of my career in what's known as the Star Wars program. This was President Reagan's initiative back in the 80s to create an Iron Dome over the United States type of thing. Many of our new citizens and younger citizens may not be aware of it, but we actually had the capability back at that time to develop technology to shoot down Soviet missiles fired at us. And I managed some of those programs. I managed a couple $100 million shuttle program that put a cryogenic infrared sensor into orbit as a technology demonstrator of this program. And I managed hundreds of PhD scientists and engineers and contracts around the country doing basic research. And then I also managed, on top of that, $1 billion satellite program, another Star Wars program, which was a technology enhancement to the previous technology we had. And that got launched in the next to, again, demonstrate the technology. And this is $1 billion satellite program. And this technology has proven itself right now. If some of you recall last summer when Iran fired hundreds of missiles at Israel, they shot down 99.5% of those missiles. They were using the Star Wars technology that I helped develop. And I'm very proud of that. I'm proud of the scientists and engineers that worked on that program with me so many years ago. So I am very familiar with working with hundreds of personnel, delegating the the jobs that each person had to bring to the project and bringing it all together for the people that I reported to. I actually reported to the chief of the SDI effort, Strategic Defense Initiative at the Pentagon, who then reported to the Vice President of the United States. So I'm familiar with the budgeting and the management of the people and projects to get the job done. And I'm proud to say every program I worked on came in on budget and on schedule. So I know how to manage these things, and I'd like to apply that type of skill to the city of Peachtree City.
I know this irritates me to no end, and I know it's got to irritate you when you see the city trying to convince you that nothing is happening on your tax bill because they use the smoke and mirrors technique as saying the millage rate did not increase. And Mayor Leonard loves to use this phrase. We did not increase the millage rate. And they try to convince you with that phrase that somehow your taxes really aren't going up. It's just the mirage on that piece of paper that the county sends you when it comes time to pay the taxes every year, because we did not increase the millage rate.
I'm just flabbergasted that someone would come with that approach. Again, they're not giving you the whole story. Of course, we all understand that the fair market value of the home you live in is what affects your tax bill. That millage rate is set, and if your fair market value goes up, it doesn't matter if that millage rate stays the same, your taxes are going up. I've had dozens and dozens of people come to me for help with appealing their fair market value so that they can get a lower tax bill. You can ask a lot of folks on Facebook how many people I've helped, how many letters I've written on posts I've made on Facebook, how to challenge and appeal your fair market value so that you can get a better tax rate. But this whole idea of the millage rate not changing, that's got to be understood right now. Right now we have like a 5.97 mill rate. It used to be 6.03 or 4, something like that. It's a minor increase, or decrease from the previous year, which has been that way for the last dozen years or so. Every one of those years where it doesn't change, you're essentially getting a tax increase in your fair market, in your tax bill, because your fair market value of your home is going up. I'm very familiar with other cities. Our sister city in Roswell has a millage rate of, 4.9 mills. Ours is 5.9 and change. Now, if you're a business and you're looking to set up shop somewhere, and you see two cities that have a mill tax rate of 4.9 versus 5.9, I'm going to the 4.9. That's why Roswell is succeeding much more successfully than Peachtree City. I know that Peachtree City has had a few businesses expand. That's great. That's great for our tax base. We've had 1 or 2 new businesses come in, but it's not enough to offset what we want to have as a rollback in our millage rate. A rollback means rolling back the millage rate by 0.1 or 0.2 so that your tax does not go up when your fair market value goes up. It can be a little complicated to understand, but that all comes together when you understand the big picture.
If your property valuation is going up and the millage rate stays the same, you're getting a tax increase. And depending on how much that valuation is, depends on how steep the tax increase is going to be. And one of the things that they love to say is for this current fiscal year, 2025, well, we reduced the millage rate. Well, they reduced it 0.06. The reduction was so tiny.
It's insignificant.
Yeah, it doesn't even matter. And one of the things.
Example. A typical home in Peachtree City, say, is $450,000, and you may be paying $5,000 annual tax on it. If you keep that millage rate the same, or even lower at 0.006, and your fair market value goes up to $550,000 or even $600,000, which a lot of homes experience, your tax bill goes from $5,000 to $6,000, and that's, lowering that by 0.06 might say, instead of going to $6,000, you go to $5,990. That few $10, $20 difference is insignificant compared to the $1,000 increase you're getting because of the fair market value increase. So you need a rollback of a 0.1 or 0.2, a full 0.1 or 4.2 to get the same tax as you paid the previous year. And that's why people are contacting me all the time asking to help with their fair market value assessment so that this millage rate doesn't kill them in the end. Because we're essentially taxing our seniors out of their homes because they're on fixed incomes. And it's not right. Our seniors need to be stable like that financially.
Well, one of the bright lights in all of this is that back when I was in office 20 some odd years ago, we created a senior low income homestead exemption for low income seniors because we knew at that time we had what we called the Eastern Airlines widows. Eastern Airlines had gone defunct, the pension plan just shattered, and we had a lot of widows of Eastern pilots who were just barely making it off of Social Security. So that was our initial thought, was we need to do something to help some of these people. They'd been living in our city for decades. And it went for about 20 some odd years. And Suzanne Brown, much to her credit, I'm going to give credit where it's due, she is finally raising the exemption levels for the senior low income homestead exemption. So credit to Suzanne Brown for doing that. It's going to be on a referendum, and we're going to have to vote on that. And I hope that the people in our community will give our low income seniors a break.
I agree. They deserve it. They shouldn't be taxed out of their homes the way things are currently going. Let me add one little, again, side note here. Fair market value increases and how to appeal. Early in the spring, say March or even April, even about right now, you're going to be getting a notice from the county tax office of your future November tax bill. They're going to give you what they anticipate your fair market value is going to be listed as. And when you get that, and if it's gone up significantly more than you think it should, you need to appeal. And I want to give you a story. If you think you were on county commissioner duty at the time, one year I got a tax increase or fair market value increase on my home. And it went up from like $350,000 home to like $475,000 home in 1 year. And I said, that's crazy. So I went and appealed. The tax office said, no, we're going to keep it the way it is. So I wound up going all the way to Superior Court. And I appealed and I won. And I got what I considered a fair market value of like $375,000 instead of $475,000. And this is the type of experience that I've shared on Facebook, many posts, of how to appeal and how to go through each step of the appeal process. But what I didn't stop just there. I took my experience to a county commission saying, you need to do something with your county tax office and say, hey, you cannot just use a computer to raise everybody's fair market value across the board. You need to look at anybody's home who's going up more than 4 or 5% and manually look at that increase. Because some of these citizens are getting 20, 30% or more fair market value increases in their homes, and they don't know how to appeal. And they're getting ripped off by their tax increases every year because they don't know what to do about it. And so I told the county about my experience, and I said, you need to tell the county tax office to look at these fair market values that are way over a certain percentage and manually check them, so that you can, first of all, reduce the number of appeals the county gets every year and be more fair with the citizens. I'm always looking out for the citizens, and it shows by the type of response I get from my Facebook posts.
Well, you know, one thing that you hear, I know Mayor Leonard has been big on this. Some local political action committees have been big on this, talking about affordable housing and making the city more affordable. Well, the easiest way to do that is stop raising all the taxes and fees every year, and you're well on your way to making it affordable. But one of the problems that we have is, you know, you've got these people who they just keep demanding certain things, but they don't really appreciate that they're actually the cause of the problem. You know, they're the ones that keep raising the cost of living in the city. And I have never once while Mayor Lerner or Mayor Fleisch her predecessor, has been in office, never once heard the council say to the department directors, find me efficiencies in your budget, identify waste in your budget, give me programs that you can eliminate, show me how technology can save money in your department. None of this. I never hear anything like that. For the last 12 years, I haven't heard a single council say, give us that directive and we'll go find the money savings and stop raising the taxes continuously.
Well, what you're talking about is what some of the folks I've been experiencing online recently is saying, hey, let's doge the city. Department of Government Efficiency at the federal level. Well, let's do that at the city level. Well, you need to be careful and sensitive about how you do something like that. And like you're describing, you need the department directors to go through and work with somebody who can come in and say, okay, let's look at your books and let's find out where you're spending money on a want to have versus gotta have type of stuff. And let's re-examine some of that stuff and then take this information back to the entire city council. Don't take it back to just the city manager. Don't take it back just to the mayor, but to the entire city council and let them discuss it in front of the citizens. Like I said, you need to be sensitive about this thing. You're not going to go out and ask them, tell me the 5 things you did today. I would hope that every current city employee would be able to do that without any question. Take 2 minutes of their time and say but we're not going to ask them to do that. That was a little insensitive, but it was essentially getting the point across that we want only those jobs that make the city efficient and prosperous and that serve the citizens for number 1, safety, and number 2, making this the best place to live that you'd ever want to move to. So, we don't want to go in and say we're going to doge the city, but we are going to go in and find out where the cost efficiencies can be found and find a way to roll back the millage rate so that our citizens aren't going to be taxed out of their homes.
Right. Well, I get sometimes there's a little hanky panky going on with the budget or the SPLOS. One example of that is the pickleball facility that Mayor Lerner wanted. It wasn't a tier 1 project. It didn't register high on the list. It wasn't a priority. We already have country clubs doing pickleball. We already have a city pickleball facility or a site. And one of the things that she did was she took that project and moved it up to tier 1. And now we have, this case came out at the retreat. They want it to be free admission, right? So we're going to build this facility using our SPLOS dollars, free admission. Now, we have 2 really super nice facilities being built for pickleball. These are private corporations building pickleball facilities because they thought we'd be a good market for it because our age skews a little higher than the rest of metropolitan Atlanta. The country clubs across Peachtree City already offer pickleball, and now we are going to compete tax-free because the city owns it, free of charge against all the people who are paying city taxes, and we're going to run them all out of business.
That does not make sense to me. I know there are perhaps maybe up to 2,000 people that replied to a survey saying, oh, yes, we want pickleball. Well, the government should not be in the business of competing against private enterprises, like you just said. We have the new MOBA down on the south side area that is building. I thought I read something about 60 pickleball courts. And then there's another private facility that's opening up with another several dozen pickleball courts. That's plenty. And like you said, we already have pickleball courts in the city, but competing against these private enterprises is not doing us any good. What we're going to do is wind up running those businesses out of business. They're going to go bankrupt. And now we're going to be left with a dead facility. Not only that, if we build these new facilities for the citizens tax-free, it's not going to be tax-free because we're going to wind up paying maintenance for them. Just like our tennis facility over there. I was on council when we had to repave tennis courts. That's not cheap. Imagine repaving 50, 60 pickleball courts. We're talking millions of dollars in the future. You got to think of the long-term effects of these enterprises when you have private companies that are willing to come in and invest their own money, provide the services, maintain them on their own private ways, allow the citizens to have these opportunities there instead of the government competing against these private entities. It just seems kind of counterintuitive to allow that to happen.
Well, and if you thought that the government competing with private businesses was bad, there's another element to this as well. With the free admission and free use of the park, well, over 50% of the pickleball users don't even reside in Peachtree City. So they're not even paying taxes in Peachtree City for the maintenance and upkeep of this facility, but they get to use it for free. And the same can be said for the $450,000 splash pad that they slipped into the budget without any notice, any public discussion, no plans. And they want that to be free as well. And a lot of the people who are using it are not going to be Peachtree City residents.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but it just sounds like vote buying. I apologize for going into the politics like that, but that's just pure vote buying. And I'm upset about the way this is going. I know when I was actually a recreation commissioner back before I was a council member, and we set up 3 tiers of fees for using our facilities. One, if you're a Peachtree City resident, which was the lowest fee of all. We wanted to keep our citizens at the bare minimum to use our facilities, a couple bucks. Then we had the county residents, who we have a shared agreement with the county where we share our recreation resources. But if you're in the county but not in the city, you pay slightly more. And then you have a third tier, which is if you're not in the county at all, we don't have any agreement with another county to share recreation services, you pay the highest tier rate. And if we're not going to do that with these recreation facilities, then we're shooting ourselves in the foot revenue-wise, maintenance-wise, and future tax increase-wise. So we need to be careful about these things and how they're set up.
Well, the biggest punch in the gut related to the retreat in February was the announcement of the brand new recreation plan. And the problem with that plan is they are introducing somewhere between 140 and $200 million worth of brand new recreation projects. And it is absolutely astounding that anybody could even make that a proposal. We only have 39,000 residents, and they wanted to bring up, and I say up to 200 million because their estimates are always so poorly done. But could you imagine 140 to $200 million worth of brand new recreation facilities, and we cannot even maintain the ones we have now? We're in arrears in maintenance currently by a large margin, and they're going to put that kind of burden on us. I can only imagine where the taxes are going to go.
It sounds astounding that that's the kind of proposal that might be made. We have a lot of recreation facilities already in the city. When we're talking about maintaining something like that, we're talking hundreds of millions more in the future. So we need to understand exactly what we're doing here, what the citizens need versus what they really gotta have type of things. We provide a lot of recreational resources already. We've got the lakes, we've got the parks, we've got the soccer fields, the baseball fields, lacrosse fields, everything you can imagine, the tennis center. We can list dozens. We have the Ketron Fieldhouse and its facility with the swimming pool over there. And we're having a hard time maintaining that. Now we want to add another $100+ million worth of recreation facilities. Is it really needed? When we're talking about, half our citizens are aging to the point where how many are going to be really using these soccer fields and baseball fields? Yes, we want our younger citizens to have that opportunity, but we've got those opportunities right now. And if they're managed properly, that should be quite sufficient. So, we got to ask ourselves, well, how big do we want Peachtree City to grow? The initial plans of the city called for like 100,000 population, or maybe slightly less, but we're now at just under 40 or at 40,000. How much further do we want to go? The only way to go is by annexing more. Annexing more causes more requirements for services. which requires more long-term maintenance and salaries of employees. So we got to be careful about all this stuff and think about.
Well, the beauty of what the city leaders did way back when they had those initial plans wanting to create a big metropolis, they actually saw the value in reducing the size of the city, creating lighter density. And that was actually more appealing. And that is what sold Peachtree City. I'm fascinated by the fact that all of these people want all of these facilities, and they're just a few people. I mean, it's a small percentage of the city, maybe 1,000 people, or maybe let's just take a high number. Let's just say 2,000 people out of 39,000 people respond to this survey. And out of that 2,000, maybe 400 will say, I want this facility. And then the city says, oh, well, we need to build this then. Well, here's the problem. You know, it's all done on scale, right? We can go to Gwinnett County and Fulton County and Cobb County, and we can look at all these wonderful facilities that they have, but look at their budgets. Look at the amount of revenue they generate, sales tax, property tax, everything else. It's in the billions of dollars. We cannot afford to have their projects on scale in Peachtree City. It just can't happen. And a lot of people just don't want to see that, but they don't realize that at some point, if you do build those facilities and they're planning on building them, your tax burden is going to be so incredibly high that they're going to run you out of the city.
Yeah, I agree. It's a problem that we need to address now before we start stepping and committing ourselves to these type of things. Again, it's something we need to look at carefully.
Well, Eric, this is a good place to end it on. Was there any other thing you wanted to say related to our current budgeting situation or things that we could do in Peachtree City?
I did have one last comment, and let me pull it up on my computer screen right now. And that has to do with this 5-year plan or 5-year projection that the city puts together as part of the budget every year. I'm very familiar with it. It's a chart about 20 pages into the 150 or so page budget. It's called the 5-year financial projection. And it shows the current adopted budget, which is the FY25 in the middle. And it shows our current millage rate at 5.99 something. And it shows that staying the same in the future without rollbacks being implemented. And I'm looking at this picture of the budget for the next 4 years in the future. And I'm looking at city reserves and I see them going down, but they're still up near the 40% type number. Way too high, in my opinion. I'm looking at the total sources of revenues continually going up by 2 to 3% per year. That's fine. You know, we have inflation and we want that. But one thing that strikes me really interesting in this budget is the previous 2 years. It shows those. And from actual FY23 to 24, there was a huge 13% increase in the use of funds. And then the same thing happened from 24 to 25, a huge increase in use of funds. I say, what are these increases all about? Are they salary increases? Are they implementing additional services that we're not aware of? I'm used to putting this chart together with a former finance director, Paul Salvatore. He and I would sit down together and make this chart come together. And I'm very familiar with this chart. In fact, the new finance director would get a real dose of information if I was ever called in to help look at the background behind these numbers, talk to it very easily. But it's something that's looking at this millage rate in the future that concerns me, the use of reserves that concerns me, and the use of funds that concerns me. The use of funds are outpacing the use of funds is outpacing the source of funds. In other words, we're anticipating using more than we're getting in each of the next 4 years. It doesn't seem to be balanced right now. So we need to get somebody in there to look at that really hard so that we can make sure the council members are properly understanding what they're voting on with their future FY26 budget. So that's how I wanted to conclude this little budget session.
Eric, we appreciate it. And, I think when your annual budget almost doubles and your population has grown, by about 7,000 people or so, I think you've got to start thinking about what's going on, what's happening. And I think that's kind of the position that we're in right now. And we don't want that position to grow in the negative. And so hopefully
Exactly. When
the
I left
citizens,
council, I think our budget was about 25 million. Now it's approaching $60 million.
it's 56.8.
The increase in population does not justify that kind of increase in the budget, but we need to look at it really hard. Like you said, the population change from when I left 10 years ago to now has only been about 7,000 versus we're more than doubling the budget.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
It's really something that we really need to be concerned about. And if I was a young family living in Peachtree City who plans on raising small children all the way out through high school in this community, I would start paying some serious attention to what the city's doing.
Well, I hope to see some of those children in the schools.
Absolutely. Well, Eric, thanks for your time. We appreciate your generous use of your time, and thanks for imparting some budget wisdom on us and having this discussion. Thank you.
Appreciate the opportunity, Steve.
Thank you for watching editorialinterchange.net. We're available on all your social media sites, and please share our content, like our posts, and please subscribe, and you'll be able to see everything that we produce. We appreciate it. It's all for you, and we want to hear what you have to say. Tell us what we need to be talking about on the next editorialinterchange.net.